We have the beautiful Amy on the podcast today, and Amy and I actually connected several years ago in a group program, and we often joke that we were the best things to come out. Our friendship was the best thing to come out of that program, but we are so grateful that it connected us. And Amy has been one of my students in By Design and also Alchemy. And I have just absolutely loved watching her journey of combining human design and nutrition. So thank you for being here with us today, beautiful.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I agree, you are the best thing that came from that program. So I'm grateful that we're here all these years later.
Yeah. Sometimes it's about the connections you make, not necessarily what you learn, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'd love for you to just share, what you do in the world and how your journey came about in the world of nutrition.
Thank you for asking. I got into nutrition because my own health took a nosedive at one point,
Mm,
and I just remember being in the hospital attached to an IV. I had been there for 4 days. I had no voice. I couldn't speak. I couldn't swallow food or liquid. And I my whole body was in chaos. And a dietitian had come up to me, and keep in mind I'm writing to her notes to respond to everything she's speaking to me, and she said, okay, so we're going to get you some beef stew and some orange jello and some milk. And I was like, that, at the time I wasn't a nutritionist, and I thought that sounds crazy. That doesn't sound right. And I mentioned, hey, just so you know, I'm actually plant-based. And she was sort of perplexed. And that was really the beginning of me recognizing, like, this feels so strange. When I think about Jello, for example, it's, gelatin and sugar and dye. And for a dietitian in a hospital to be offering that as, quote, food was just really bizarre. So that awakened something in me. And I think that I've always had the inclination towards health and wellness, and especially the alternative methods that aren't so common and aren't so spoken about. And it
mm,
just led me down the path of wanting to learn how to heal my body. And so I took myself through school. And while I was in school, I learned so much about the gut microbiome. And I learned so much about how our own brains are connected to our guts, and how our bodies express, and how our hormones are connected to how we digest. And it just became this sort of snowball effect of learning how to heal myself, and then having friends and family come up to me and ask me questions. And the advice that I was giving was really well received and actually helpful, and it just started to boost the confidence a little bit. So a couple of years later, I started getting into Ayurveda and into yoga, and it just became this really beautiful synergy of understanding food as something so different from how it's marketed, as understanding our bodies is so much more powerful than we're taught that they are, and
mm,
really seeing how that type of understanding, the foundational understanding, was supporting not only me, but also my clients. And
mm.
spoiler alert, that was 10 years ago I was in the hospital, and I've never been sick like that ever again.
Wow.
So it was a really beautiful beginning. It was hard and challenging, I think, like a lot of them are, but that's what brought me here.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a common thing for all of us, right? How we actually get on the path of service that we do in the world is often because of our own experience. So that experience definitely set you on a really beautiful path to get you here, even though, like you said, it was challenging at the time. I also feel like one of the things that I have learnt so deeply this year, and we were having a chat before we jumped on, was just the value of your health, especially as an entrepreneur, where your business is literally the output of the health and vitality that you have. And for me,
Mm.
I've been going through a lot of gut repair and gut healing challenges this year that had also impacted my energy levels and my mental health and my ability to show up in my business in the same way. And, it really gave me a lot to consider. But I often find within the, spiritual communities and some of the wellness communities, I think sometimes actually our health is the last thing that we look at. And I've had people even come to have readings with me because they're like, I'm tired all the time. There must be something in my design that will give me clues to that. And I'm like, well, there may be, but have you had a blood test recently? Have you spoken to a nutritionist? Have you been to see a naturopath? Are your supplements or like, are your nutrition in check? So I feel like, this is actually
Yeah.
a really important element. No matter what we do, who we are, our health is literally everything. And
Mhm.
whether that comes down to business, relationships, career, our own, ability to enjoy life, our health really is at the center to all of that. And, my model growing up was, I had two workaholic parents. My dad ended up terminally ill, and my mum, really modeled for me what overworking looked like. And I thought that I would never repeat that, but I definitely have repeated some of those behaviors in my own business, prioritizing other things other than my health. And so
Mhm.
this year has been a bit of a wake up call for me. So services like yours are just so important. And I highly encourage everyone listening to this to just make sure if they do have a repeated symptom to get it checked out by a professional.
Yes, I just want to take a moment to land on this because it's such an important thing you're talking about. Whenever I hear of this, like you were talking about people in the spiritual community, and we're so quick to look at the stars for something that's happening in our physical body. Not to say that has nothing to do with it. There's absolutely elements of human design and astrology that have to do with our bodies, with all
Yeah.
of these systems. The chakra system is the perfect example of that. And I think it's really easy to look at something like broccoli and salads and say, but I'm eating all of the really healthy foods. It can't
Yeah.
be that.
Mm,
And this is where someone, from my profession, for example, I would step in and say, if you have a vata imbalance, Ayurvedically speaking, maybe having raw salads is actually not supportive for you. Same
mm.
thing if someone's really kapha or really pitta. The other day, my mom even said to me, she's like, just put a couple of bell peppers in my salad. I don't really like them. They give me acid reflux. And I was like, well, then don't eat them. You don't have to have any of them. And she was like, okay, I won't. And I think it was the first time it really dawned on her. She doesn't have to eat this quote health food just because the world tells you it's healthy. So that is definitely the PSA here. I think,
Mm.
maybe what you're doing, even though by the books looks really, really great, it doesn't always mean that it's great for you as an individual. And that's where, and I know we're going to talk about this more in depth, but that's where something like human design can actually be such a great tool to understanding how, yeah, how we're supposed to nourish ourselves.
Exactly. And, even from my perspective this year with what I've been navigating, and even beyond that, when I had really bad perioral dermatitis in 2020, what I was really observing within myself at that time was the same thing. I thought I was eating well, I was eating healthy, I was eating clean. But at the time, I had a histamine intolerance, and I was eating a lot of foods that were high in histamine and actually worsening my symptoms and the symptomatic response that my body was displaying. So I think there's
Mm,
so much value when you don't feel your best, even if it's just a persistent fatigue. Even when you just don't feel your best, you maybe feel a bit of brain fog, you're bloated, like all of these things that we normalize in society are quite often solved if we're able to actually look at it from that more physical standpoint. And like you said, I absolutely, obviously being, an Astro girly, like I do feel like, sometimes eclipse season, the full moon, all the things can definitely impact us. Obviously, living out of alignment with our design can definitely impact us. But sometimes there is that more tangible physical nourishment that we can look at as well. And it's just as important as all of the other investments that we make in our business, in our career, in our life, is that foundation of you being the output and the source for all of it.
absolutely. Like here, mic drop.
Yeah.
That was,
And so obviously you said that, with the individual approach looking at human design, what was it that made you step into by design and decide to add human design to your toolkit in your business?
oh, I have to say, like, just for anyone listening to this, the way that I found human design was through Kirsten. You initiated
Yeah.
me, you brought me into this world, and it was really through observing you and observing the types of shifts that you were having in your business and the types of shifts you were having and how you communicated. And it was just such a beautiful thing to witness. Now,
Mm.
prior to actually doing my first reading with you, I had looked into my chart and I looked at this crazy. I didn't even know what I was looking at. And I just thought to myself, you know what? We're going to categorize that as new age, whatever.
Yeah.
Don't need
I
to look
looked
into it.
the first time I looked at my chart was 2 years before I studied it, and when I first looked at it, I remember distinctly thinking, "Ugh, whatever that is," and just literally closed the screen. I just thought it was way too complex. I thought it was for, like, quantum physicists or something to
Yeah,
extract the information. I thought it was way too hard. Just put it in the too hard basket, and I often think, what would have happened if I had have actually explored it in 2018?
agreed. Totally agreed. And it was through observing you that kind of brought me back into that world. I remember thinking, okay, that's it. There's something here and I want to know. I'm just going to book a reading. And it was in that 90-minute reading, I was so hooked. So just for anyone
Mm,
listening, I'm a generator and I'm a 5-1 and I'm sacral.
yeah.
So it was, in that call, I just felt so seen for the first time in such a way that, someone explaining astrology had not yet allowed me to feel seen in that type of way. I started to understand that I was feeling really lit up on the call. And then my first line, my investigator came online, and I was like, now I need to know everything about this. So, yeah, first I signed up for alchemy pretty much right away before By Design was even born. And I might have bothered you a few times about, hey, when are you going to put out a reader training? When are you going to
You
put
were
out a
not the
reader
only
training?
one.
I'm so glad that worked.
Yes.
And it just felt like a really natural progression. Like I felt so called to understand how something so seemingly mystical could be grounded in logic. And I found that human design has this really beautiful synergy between the mystical and the logical. And that's where I love to play. I really love to play in this world where it's like, sure, we could look at this as magic, and on some level it is absolutely magic, right? But there's actually a scientific background to it. And when those two worlds come together, that's where I find the real magic actually is. So when you open By Design, it was just like a very clear sign me up. Obviously, I'm going to be there. Um, and what really drew me in the most was how we're able to understand our digestion through the system of human design. Because of course, as a digestive health specialist, it tickled my intrigue. And yeah, that was where we started to play.
Beautiful. And I have loved watching how you have woven it into what you already did so well. It just was so complementary and seamless the way that it really supported your business and what you decided to do with it. So, what have you noticed has been the biggest shift since adding human design in? How has that impacted the results that you're able to give your clients?
Well, thank you for saying that, firstly. How has it shifted how I work? In my work, I progressed from holistic nutrition, which was very like science based, and we look at food and what food does in the average person's body. And then I started to look at Ayurveda, and Ayurveda took a lot of the principles it was actually the other way around. Holistic nutrition took principles from Ayurveda, but essentially it sort of brought a lot of the logistics and scientific aspect into food, but then it also put some of the elemental earth aspects into there. So,
Mm,
for example, looking at a person as air and ether, or fire and water, or earth and water, and understanding how the gunas or qualities of food and activities and thoughts and emotions, etc., could impact our body and our way of expressing our health. So that was like a whole other little package of understanding people as an individual, but it was still limiting. And I
mm,
didn't know it was limiting until I discovered human design. What human design allowed me to bring into my practice was looking at somebody, and rather than saying, well, according to Ayurveda, which is a 5,000-year-old system, which is amazing, and by no means am I discrediting that at all. According to Ayurveda, the best time to eat is midday, right? To have a really big meal midday, because that's when our fire is the highest. That's when we digest the strongest. But then what I learned through human design is to take it even a step. It's like taking a magnifying glass and just looking a little bit closer at a person. And if
mm,
someone has, let's say, indirect light as their digestive sort of function. Maybe for them, not eating in the day is going to be much better for their digestive system. Maybe eating a little closer to bedtime, maybe even waiting till after dark. For some people, maybe eating with the television on, or having some sort of noise, having a little bit more distraction and vibration moving around them can be really supportive. Whereas we don't learn that in Ayurveda or in holistic nutrition. It's a lot more one size fits all, even though it felt very individualistic. So to answer that, it helped me to zoom in on the individual and to really look at little tiny aspects that are going to support them
Mm,
with their habits, with their rituals, with their eating patterns, to be specific to that person,
yes.
while still integrating principles from Ayurveda, while still integrating principles from holistic nutrition. So yeah, it felt like they just were really complementary.
Yeah. And, I am a low sound determination, which means that for me, how I am best supported to digest my food and the world around me is actually in more peaceful environments. And I find that very challenging to do, I've got to be honest, because what I notice in myself is when I'm eating, particularly at lunch, I'm either checking my phone, replying to DMs, watching stories, jumping on TikTok. I'm trying to use it as like a little break.
Mm,
But what I really have noticed since going deeper on my gut healing journey is because I'm a lot more sensitized to my symptoms and the way that I'm digesting food at the moment. What I've realized is that anytime I'm not now eating peacefully, that is when I have the most
mm,
symptoms. And I thought to myself as well is that I'm in now this point in my deconditioning journey because as you go deeper down the human design rabbit hole, the more you become attuned and aligned with your design, the less you're able to tolerate not being in alignment. And so this has been a
mm,
huge lesson for me this year is actually honoring my proper way of digestion.
mm.
Mm.
And how have you noticed that your environment plays a role in that? How have you noticed that, or I guess, how do you curate an environment that's going to support you in that
So
as a low
what I've,
sound person? And
yeah,
your valleys, right?
valleys. Valleys
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot to do with my digestion, I'm noticing, because well, actually, no, that's not necessarily true. The way that I see the valleys come into it is if I'm going out to eat, it has to be the right place for me to plug into. And I have to
Mm,
have the correct positioning in the restaurant, particularly as a valleys person, to be able to people watch and observe my entire surroundings and be in a position in the dining area where all of the sound is coming at me directly. And so that is the valleys
mm,
thing, but it's also the low sound thing. I can't have this mishmash of noise all over the place. And I'll give you an example of this. Last year when I was doing environments experiments, this is when I started to notice it, is I went to one of my favorite cafes and I tried to work there for the first time. And because it was so busy, I couldn't get a spot where I wanted to. And I ended up sitting because they've got this sort of, it's a French cafe. So they've got this kind of outdoor dining area. And I ended up in the very front row with everybody behind me. And I could
mm,
not focus. I could not comfortably digest my food because there was so much distorted noise coming from behind me. But then trying to work in my computer, I had a different sort of noise in front of me and I could not do a thing. So I got up. I went to my other favorite place within this complex. I was the only one there. So I managed to actually sit in the corner in there, and their restaurant is actually in this very narrow valley style arrangement where it's rows, it's small, it's really beautiful. But they had one of my favorite artists playing on the soundtrack as well. And as soon as I got there, when I tell you how much work I got done in a 2 hour window, it was like a week's worth of work because I was just in my ideal environment and the sound that was around me was perfect. Had I chosen to eat there, I probably would have had a very different dining experience. So, where I've noticed my environment comes into play is when I'm out of the house. When it comes to being in the house, I guess how that kind of interlinks is when I'm plugged into noise. And noise is
mm,
TV, it's social media because that's stimulating, it's complex sounds. Whereas a
mhm.
low sound determination is not supportive of my digestion. So the best thing that I can do for myself is literally put the phone away and maybe eat outside. Or when I sit at my dining room table, I have a clear view out into my courtyard, which has beautiful greenery, and just sitting there and eating intentionally always goes better than when I'm
Yeah.
not. So when I'm out, even though I may have more complex sounds because obviously in a restaurant, you're going to not have the same level of peace as if you're eating quietly in your own courtyard. But
Mhm.
how I've noticed that I can support myself in that is plugging into the correct environment and having the correct position to minimize the impact of sound.
I love that. I love that. Such a great example. And within all of that, another way that I like to think about this, just for other people who are listening and might want another perspective on the sound, it's like volume. How much can you take
Mm,
in at a time? And so it sounds like even when you had all those people behind you and all the noises, it's so much your body is trying to take in at the same time that you're trying to learn or produce or do
yeah.
something in your computer. And same thing with food. It's a matter of volume. And what's interesting is, I know that you were sharing a little bit about some of your healing journey with your gut over this past year, and it sounds like there's already a lot happening
Mhm.
internally. And so,
Yes.
no wonder if you're feeling so sensitive to the other stuff that's coming in through your other senses, let alone everything that's happening underneath of the surface of your body. It's so much. So, I think
Right.
that it sounds like your environment, it sounds like you know, your sound, everything is going to be so deeply affected because of all of the work that's happening. So that's such a
Absolutely.
fascinating
And what's
way
really
to look at
interesting
health.
that just clicked to me as well is that I've had a real sensitivity to the volume of food I've been eating this
Mm,
year. I used to
mhm,
always joke that I ate like a trucker because I just always was eating these like giant portions, or I'd go back for like thirds and fourths. Like, it's just, I've always had a big appetite. So for me this year, I've really had to scale it back. And now my portion size is so much smaller. So I've also had an intolerance to the volume of food
mhm,
as
mhm,
well. So there's definitely been a really big element of my determination that has really played a big part in my human design journey this year for sure.
mm.
Yeah,
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
thank you. And so what are some of the more specific results that you've seen from adding human design in? What have you noticed with your clients from implementing certain aspects of their design in their own health journey?
It's so awesome to see what trickles from this. I think a lot of the time, one of the sort of consistent patterns I've seen with my clients is that generally speaking, I'll have, mostly women come to me and say, I just want to feel better. And often we start with these more, I'm going to use the term superficial, and I don't mean it with a negative connotation at all, but the more superficial meaning literally on the outside. I
Mm,
want my skin to be clear. I want to lose weight. I want my clothes to fit a certain way. I want to appear and come across a certain way. And then we start working together and we start to see all of these other things bubble up, like workaholism, like really lacking boundaries in the home and with other people, just some emotional eating patterns, things that are much deeper than the superficial. And as we start to work on and heal some of those underlying issues through using tools like human design, right? We start to see, wow, you know what? I was able to set a boundary with my family. That's really cool. I was able to do this thing that I wasn't able to last year. I was able to take some time away from work and actually feel really good about it and shut everything down. I was really able to recognize when I was about to go into an emotional eating pattern and stop it and
mm,
course correct and rewire some patterns in that area. So when you're asking about specific results, I find that it's more often than not something that has to do with how people are treating themselves, how my
mm,
clients are treating themselves, how they're responding to their environment around them. And, with the projectors, for example, I think that every projector loves to learn that they're a projector because it's like, oh my God, how relieving to know that like this is how I'm designed to be received. This is how I'm designed to interact with other people, to support other people, to guide other people. And as soon as we start to direct them towards their way of being, it it trickles down into every relationship that they have, whether that's in work, whether that's in their home, whether that's with their family members, whatever it is. So when we're talking about specific results, it's interesting because I get flooded with so many different ideas of what that could look like. And more often than not, it's so different from what my clients will originally come to me for.
mm,
Along with, of course, there have been results like clients, having their hormones be balanced. One of my clients who was in amenorrhea for many years started to bleed again, which is amazing,
mm,
right? Had clients who were able to lose weight and actually keep the weight off, who were able to move into plant-based living, which is something that they really struggled with because their entire family was eating animal products, and actually hold that boundary for themselves and feel really good about it. There have been so many different ways that manifests. But I don't know if that answers your question.
It
We can
does.
always go more specific for sure, but
No,
yeah.
I love that. And it's just, I think, such a great example of some of the things that just naturally happen when we're in alignment with our design and our natural way of being, is
Mm.
that we really do tend to move into a new state of being that actually really supports how we are here to operate. And it then obviously has a knock on effect to our health as well.
You said that beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what surprised you, or like, obviously now having looked at quite a few charts and having these client examples, what has surprised you about human design and nutrition, or what have you noticed that has really stood out to you from using this and looking at the chart?
What has surprised me?
Or what stood out to you? What
Hmm.
have you noticed that you're like, "Oh, that's fascinating that there's a correlation
Hmm.
there."
I think we've spoken about this one before, but I have been noticing, and by no means have I seen this written anywhere. By no means is this fact. And actually, I would love to put the invitation out for anybody listening to this to let me know if this resonates for you. I've really been paying attention to eating patterns of different energy types. For example, when I think of manifestors, right? The manifestors I know in my life tend to have these really big surges of like, we're going to eat, we're going to eat, we're going to eat, and then we're going to rest. And again, please, for every person listening, I would actually love to hear from you. Please write to me and let me know if this
Yeah.
resonates. For generators, I've been noticing generators tend to have a very steady appetite, right? Like there will often be these moments of just like, well, it's time to eat again. It's time to eat again. And really on top of that, a lot of the projectors I've met and have worked with have been known to either forget to eat from time to time, or like one projector in particular, if you're listening to this, I love you so much, tends to have a bowl of food and let it draw out for a couple of hours and just eat it really inconsistently or slowly, right? I haven't known too many reflectors that I've been able to actually reflect on this with yet, but I would
Yeah.
love to hear what that's going to be like for the reflectors out there too, and how their environment is affecting them. And one thing
Yeah.
I do know about the couple reflectors I've spoken with is that their environment is everything. Let's say you're in a work environment that feels kind of hostile, or that's really gossipy, or that's draining your energy. Maybe having lunch with the people that you work with might not be supportive for you and could take away from
Mm,
that. And so this is one thing that I've just been paying attention to. And outside of that, what really stood out and what's been interesting and sort of surprised me was, of course, the different types of determination and
mm.
how our environments really play a role in all of that. Those are the two aspects that I find so fascinating. Cognition as well. The the three really major aspects of our digestion when it comes to human design. I'm constantly met with just, wow, this actually lands. This actually makes sense.
Yeah. And especially for
So
me as a touch cognition, what I notice is that my skin is the first to react to
right.
what's happening inside. So there's such
Yeah.
a huge link there for me personally. And what I see is when we're
Hmm.
not in the right environment, when we're not nourishing ourselves correctly, we either have symptomatic responses in our cognition, which is essentially our sensory superpower, or it gets shut down or shut off in some way. And so it's really
Mm.
fascinating to look at it from that angle as well.
Yeah, and just to second that, I have a taste cognition, and for me, it's always my throat and my mouth that starts to get affected first. So usually, if my immune system is low, I'm going to feel my throat acting up. I'll tend to get like sort of interesting feelings in my tongue. It's always to do with my
Mm,
mouth and my taste first. So I
wow.
can absolutely second that notion, and it is fascinating. I find that it can feel very, whenever I'm researching or learning or reading about human design, and when I was going through by design as well, it's like, yeah, right, this can't be real for everybody. And then I started to do readings and I would see, wow, this is really accurate, just being met with
Yes.
so much affirmation that this is actually true, and people feeling validated and how they're actually meant to work through the world,
Yeah.
mechanically speaking. So
Yeah. That's one
yeah.
of the things that I have found with human design that really validated it for me. was that it wasn't just a concept that you were trying to articulate to people
Mhm.
and getting a like, "Oh, yeah, okay, maybe I could give that a go." It's more like, "Whoa, yes, that is me. How do you know? Are you in my mind?" Like, and just really having so much resonance to it that I've
Yeah.
never had anyone that I've shared human design with that hasn't had resonance to it, that's been like, "No,
Mhm.
I don't relate to that." And
Agreed.
so it's so beautiful, and just what you were sharing before about the energy types and eating, I definitely noticed that within myself as a manifestor. I definitely tend to have little surges of eating, but also I eat quickly. I feel like I surge my
Mm.
food as well.
Mhm.
So that has been also a lesson for me this year is slowing down, reducing the portions, honoring my correct environment, like all of the things has been, yeah, really, really profound for me this year too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to second that sentiment around what it might look like if you're like I want to just also mention for generators what consistency could look very different for every single generator.
Yes.
I'm in a stage right now where I'm not working out a lot because I just moved into a new environment and I'm sort of adjusting. And for me, consistency is like one or maybe two meals a day. It doesn't mean you're eating 5 meals a day. It doesn't mean that manifestors are
Yes.
eating huge portions and then going into food comas. Like it's going
Yeah.
to be relative to how you are and who you are as a person. I just
Yes.
wanted to put that out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so last question, what have you noticed within yourself from implementing your human design executing on your human design experiment? What have you noticed within yourself or within your business? What's shifted for you personally?
Hmm. Within myself, I have become so much more attuned to what joy feels like.
Mm.
Um, I think that it's interesting when I'm talking with people and it's about a subject that actually fascinates me. I'm so aware of how my body expands, how my aura
Yes.
expands and pulls people in. And, in particular, when I'm sharing about human design or something that I'm really excited about, it's amazing to watch heads turn and everyone listens because I'm genuinely overflowing with excitement and pulling them in. So
Yeah.
witnessing that in action has been really, really cool and learning to follow that. And I will speak to the flip side as well when I am in conversation or in any kind of relationship that feels draining. I'm so hyper attuned to that feeling of like, well, this is it. I'm going to fall asleep. Like, I don't feel good in this conversation. Maybe we need to step away from this or turn away from this. So that's been really amazing. And that trickles into my business as well. Of course, just learning how to delegate stuff that doesn't feel good, that doesn't actually spark joy, the stuff that I don't need to be doing. And I think that, anyone here who's a business owner can resonate with having a really tight grip on everything and feeling weird giving that task to someone else. But something that has been so freeing has been me hiring a virtual assistant and passing along some of the recurring tasks that were really just draining and actually taking away from the parts that of my business that brought me joy, the parts of my business that I'm able to be in my power about. Um, and on a slightly different note, learning about my environment was also really important for my business. I am a markets environment, and it was it just dawned on me like, wow, the way that I've designed my home, the way that I, have even designed my website at the time, things have changed since then, right? It was very much like a marketplace. It was very much let's go in and let's click around and see what there is and see what kind of offerings and learn something and have little tastes of things. I'm also a taste person. So just allowing that to flow into my business, that energy to flow into my business has been feeling really good rather than trying to follow a script about how business should look and only having one offer, right? That actually isn't good for me. I like having multiple offers. That's
Yeah.
part of my design. So that was
Yeah.
really freeing.
I love that. And you're one of the people I've definitely noticed when I'm watching stories because I do know your design. And by the way, if I follow you and I know your design, I'm constantly watching you as a case study. Like, not to be creepy, but I'm always just observing people because I can't help it. I can't shut that part of my brain off. I'm just fascinated and in love with seeing people execute their design in that way. So I'm always watching stories and I'm like, oh, wow, like that's so cool. They're using that part. I wonder if they know they're using that part. Like I'm just or and sometimes I will DM you and be like, I'm seeing this in you right now. So I'm constantly telling you as well. But for you as that generator, that sacral magnetism, I mean, you're such an incredible speaker anyway. And I've told you that before. And you've got some incredible channels that lead to your throat that I feel like are so representative in how you communicate and express. And I could just listen to you all day. But when
Thank you.
you are in that sacral joy, like I can see that oozing off you in your stories because there was one that I remember watching and you were literally moving. You couldn't even control the sacral satisfaction. It was just actually moving through your body. And even though whatever you were sharing about wasn't necessarily for me, I watched every single story because I was like, wow, I'm just enthralled by what you're saying. And I'm leaning in and I'm sucked into this sacral magnetism and I'm have a contact high, all the way from Australia. So it was just so beautiful. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about helping generators find that satisfaction and reconnect to their joy because you guys really are the pulse of the universe. So I just love you endlessly.
Oh, that's very sweet. I like that reflection. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your beautiful magic with us today and your perspective and your wisdom and your knowledge. And if people want to reach out and find you, where can they do that?
Well, I appreciate being here. Thank you. You can always reach me on Instagram or on TikTok or on any of the places. It's either going to be Amy Activates, AMY Activates on Instagram and stuff like that. Or you can check out my website, which is namatastenutrition.com. So
Yes.
just like namaste, but we taste.
Yes, I will put it in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for being here, beautiful. I just adore hearing you speak. So thank you.
Thank you. Love you, girl.
Love you too.